In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. So I was thinking kind of an analogy to like this topic, and I was thinking about like if you have a garden that you plant, and you spend a lot of effort to plant the garden, and you have all kinds of plants and flowers and things in the garden, and it looks immaculate and beautiful at the beginning, but then you don't do anything to kind of maintain it, and you don't put any protection or hedge around it, nothing to protect it from kind of anything else encroaching on it. Eventually, what will happen is weeds will begin to grow, and they will infest the garden and destroy the garden. And this is kind of what, maybe an analogy that we can think about when we speak about boundaries. Another example I thought of was actually a parable, the parable of the wheat and the tares. In this parable, you have someone who planted wheat in a field, but then at night, it says the enemy came and planted tares, which are weeds that are in the field. How is it that the enemy was able to come and to plant these tares that are in the field? It's because there was no boundary. There was nothing that stopped him from coming to plant these tares. And so over time, what's something that kind of started out as good and functional and as it should be, over time there started to become other things that began to grow in this field that ultimately could destroy the field. And the same is true with our marriages. Most of the time when people get married, their marriage starts out kind of running on its own momentum. The momentum of we met each other, we got married, there's so many changes in our lives, we're moving in together, everything is a whirlwind, and everything is kind of like emotional, and it feels new and exciting, and everything's kind of propelled by the inertia of all of the changes that are happening. But if we allow the marriage to simply run on inertia, eventually that inertia can begin to die down. And unless we protect the marriage and we nurture it, and we protect it from forces that are trying to destroy it, then we can have a problem in the long run. And I was thinking about 3 different ways that the devil tries to attack the marriage. One way is he will try to attack the individual, right? One of the two or both people individually, meaning in their own spiritual life, right? Trying to incite a person to begin to fall into anger, begin to fall into jealousy, begin to lose their patience, begin to fall into lust. Whatever begins, from one person, then of course affects the relationship. That's one kind of attack. It's a personal spiritual attack. Then the second kind of spiritual attack is the attack that affects the couple together. For instance, misunderstandings and miscommunication and not spending enough time together, and differences of opinion, and not having unity in the way we approach life, right? Having different goals. This is a second attack, right? So the first attack was the attack on the individual. The second attack was an attack in the relationship itself. A third attack is the attack from the outside, right? The attack could be the pressure of work that's taking up our time. The attack could be criticism that we are receiving from the outside. The attack could be influences of in-laws or other people or friends, other things from the outside of the relationship that then also begin to put stress and strain on the relationship. And the solution to each of these 3 types of attack is some kind of a boundary, right? For the first attack, the spiritual attack, the boundary is my own spiritual discipline. It is protecting myself. It's protecting my senses. It's being invested in my spiritual life to protect me from the attacks of the enemy. And the second, it's always being very intentional in my communication and my desire to sacrifice for the sake of my spouse, and trying to place the needs of my spouse above my own. All the things that protect the relationship. And then the third is having, again, boundaries that protect the relationship from things on the outside that could potentially harm the relationship. And again, doing it in a very intentional way. So the marriage that is very much built on healthy boundaries, boundaries that are designed to protect the fragile relationship, is a marriage that can be very successful and successful into the future. Whereas a couple that kind of enters into marriage a bit naively, thinking that because things are good today, they're going to remain good forever, and we don't really pay much attention to either our personal spiritual life or of our our interaction as a couple, or in protecting the forces that are on the outside from kind of entering in and disrupting the relationship, this can be a big source of problem, and it can happen gradually so that the couple is not even realizing that the changes that are happening, the problems that are happening, and then they find themselves kind of disconnected from one another, or they find themselves battling, the same problems that are kind of interfering with the marriage on a daily basis, that maybe if they were more diligent in protecting themselves from some of these things at the beginning, they could have protected themselves from these things entering. So this is the topic for today, is boundaries. How do we place healthy boundaries in our relationships of different types? Okay, so first, what are boundaries and why are they important? Boundaries are personal limits that define where one person ends and another begins, and they protect what is sacred, healthy, and holy within a relationship. So think again that a boundary is a way for me to separate what is mine versus what is not mine, right? So when we place a boundary as in a relationship, to protect it from something, right? It is designed to separate between what is mine or what is ours from what is not. Some of the purposes: to protect love from being damaged by misuse or imbalance. So again, if we are don't have a balanced relationship because, let's say, one spouse spends so much time at work, and that spending that much time at work disrupts the family time that we have, we can place a boundary, right? We can say, no, I'm going to speak to my boss and I'm going to say I can't work after a certain hour. Or if that's not even possible, maybe I need to change jobs, to say that to find one that allows me to have a more balanced life. That's a boundary. Also, to define responsibility, what belongs to me and what belongs to you. So, for instance, one of the things that related to the relationship, right? Maybe one of the things that causes problems in the relationship is we don't have a good assignment of chores, of who's going to do what, who's responsible for what in the relationship. Maybe I think that you're going to be responsible for this, but you think I'm supposed to be responsible for this. And so when whatever it is doesn't happen, it's a source of conflict, right? Why didn't you do it? Well, I thought you were going to do it, right? So a simple boundary would be, we're going to define some rules and say, okay, this is my responsibility and this is your responsibility, right? So there's no misunderstanding. 3, to maintain mutual respect and freedom. And the idea of boundaries is not to hinder or to restrict freedom, but it's actually to give freedom. It's actually to give a feeling that I'm able to operate in security and safety, knowing where my boundaries are. The same is true actually for kids, right? Like we always speak about how kids need to know the boundaries. They need to know what is permitted for them and what is not permitted. And if you don't define clear rules and boundaries for children, what ends up happening is they have a sense of insecurity, because they know that at any point in time, they might transgress some kind of unsaid rule, and when they do it, they're going to be yelled at, right? Like I didn't know that this wasn't permitted. Or maybe 9 times out of 10, I did the same thing and my parents never yelled at me, but then the 10th time, suddenly, it's a huge problem. It actually makes children feel insecure because they don't know that what is going to be the parent's response to their actions, right? They want to feel like, I know what is allowed, I know what is good. Of course, they can choose to disobey, but at least when they choose to disobey, then they are choosing the consequence rather than innocently doing something without realizing that there is a consequence. The same is true in relationships. In order for the couple to have a healthy relationship with one another, I need to know and understand, how is my spouse going to respond to certain things? What are some things that they like and what are some things that they don't like? And that those things have been clearly articulated and we understand each other. We understand what we enjoy to do and what we don't enjoy. And that way I can make good choices. Like if I know that my spouse doesn't like a certain thing, then I will choose not to do that thing. But if I don't know that my spouse doesn't like a certain thing and I'm just doing it naively, and in the meantime my spouse is thinking, oh, well, he should understand or he should know that I don't like this. Well, maybe I don't know that, right? Setting a boundary is not just about setting the boundary, but communicating the boundary. You say, I don't like such and such, or I like such and such. At that point, then, it's up to each person. Am I going to abide by the boundary that I was told, that I was informed of, or am I going to ignore it? But it's still a decision that I can only make when there has been effective communication, that we tell each other what it is that we enjoy, what it is that we do not enjoy. And sometimes this can be an uncomfortable conversation. You know, if I tell my spouse, I don't like something that you're doing, maybe this is going to cause them to be upset. But we also have to be realistic and honest, but do it with gentleness. Also, it's to reflect God's order. So in the Garden of Eden, there was a boundary not to eat of the tree of knowledge. A big part of the boundaries that we have in our relationships, if we want to have healthy relationships, is that there are certain lines that we don't transgress, right? Like there's certain things that we don't allow ourselves to do. A big chunk of that has to do with, morality, right? Like what we believe, like what is it God has said is permitted and not permitted. So we as a couple, right, for instance, should not watch certain movies. We as a couple should not go to certain places. We as a couple should protect ourselves from certain experiences, right? And maybe that goes to more to the first type of attack that I mentioned, was the personal spiritual attack, right? That if I allow myself to be corrupted by the world, right, then this is going to indirectly influence also my relationship. So this is some of the purposes of boundaries. Without boundaries, love becomes control, resentment, or chaos, right? Because there is no clear sense of what is allowed, what is not allowed, what do you like, what do you not like, what is it that we're going to allow into our home, what is it we are not going to allow into our home, what is my expectation of you and how you behave versus what is your expectation of me. With boundaries, trust and safety flourish. Again, there's a sense of security, knowing that I can go through my day understanding what is it that my spouse is expecting of me, and that I know that as long as I'm within the boundaries that has been set, then there will be peace, right? There will be peace. There will not be conflict, because I know what causes conflict. Anything that goes outside the boundary can cause conflict, but anything inside within the boundary, it will be peaceful. They keep sin, manipulation, and emotional burnout out of the relationship, right? Why manipulation? Because sometimes, let's say I want my spouse to do something, but instead of being very clear and articulating, this is what I want you to do, then I can begin to manipulate my spouse to try to get them to do what I want in a very indirect way. Not direct, not clear, not transparent, but kind of through a spirit of manipulation, trying to get them to do what I want. And there's two kinds of manipulation. There's what's called like aggressive manipulation, like maybe I can try to control a person by being aggressive. This tends to be more what the men do, right? They yell, they become angry, they make threats, right? This is a way I'm trying to get my spouse, maybe my wife, to do something that I want her to do that she hasn't done. Women tend to do more of a manipulative kind of control, which is I'm trying to get you to do what I want through shaming, through guilt, through other kinds of manipulation, right? Of course, both can do both, but it tends to be, men tend to be the more aggressive and women tend to be the more manipulative. But again, this is the reason that this is happening is because there is not clear boundaries, right? I don't really know what you want, and I'm not accepting that you said that you don't want to do something. So let's say I want my spouse to do something, and they said, I understand that this is what you like and this is what you want, but for whatever reason, I can't do it. This is also setting a boundary. This is considered a boundary between the spouses. And maybe it sounds strange to speak about boundaries between the spouses, because we speak about in marriage there's supposed to be unity, right? And so we're supposed to be united together. But being united together does not remove the fact that we are individuals, and that as individuals we have different desires and we have different likes and dislikes. We have different opinions, right? Not everything that we do is we're going to be 100% in agreement about it. So if there's something that I don't like, and I'm setting a boundary with my spouse, and I'm saying, please don't, make noise in the house after a certain hour because I'm asleep, let's say. That's a boundary. That's saying that, like, I don't want you to behave a certain way. Okay, so again, it's a clear, direct communication that then should be honored and respected by the other person. So I'm going to speak a little bit about what are some boundaries that we have. So the first boundary that I mentioned was the boundary with the self. This is referring to protect us from the attack of the devil on each partner individually, which has a huge impact on the relationship. Think of it like this. Like if you had someone who was a saint, right, that was married, compared to someone who, is the complete opposite of that, like a wicked person who is married, right? Which one do you think is going to have a more successful marriage, right? The person who has learned virtue, the person who has learned patience, the person who knows how to love unconditionally, the person who's able to forgive, that's the person who's going to have a more successful marriage, and that's the one that you're most likely going to want to be married to, right? So our personal spiritual growth and our personal spiritual life has a huge impact on the relationship, even though it's not directly about something relational. It's not directly about our communication or our conflict resolution or making decisions or anything like that. But if each one of us is Christ-like, then our relationship will be Christ-like. So the purpose of this, boundaries with the self, is to maintain self-control and spiritual integrity in each individual. In Proverbs 4:23, it says, "Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it springs the issues of life." Right? So if you keep your heart with diligence, then all of your actions, everything about your life will be also filled with grace, filled with the Holy Spirit, will be Christ-like in everything that we do. Without personal self-control, placing healthy boundaries for the relationship is impossible. If I don't know how to defer gratification, if I don't know how to have patience, if I don't know how to restrict myself, so again, if my spouse sets a boundary, if I don't know how to honor that boundary, then it's impossible for me to have a healthy relationship because I'm not able to control myself, right? So we learn self-control, right, all throughout our lives to varying degrees with varying levels of success. But the person who truly has mastered themselves, who has self-control, is then able to learn how to interact with another person in a giving way, in a self-sacrificial way, in a forgiving way. Whereas a person who has not learned self-control and all they care about is to gratify themselves and to please themselves, then instead of seeing themselves as an agent of showing love and goodness to their spouse, instead they're going to see almost in a narcissistic way, actually everyone around me is here to serve me. My spouse is here to serve me. Everything he or she does has to be focused on me. And so whenever that person does something to bother me or to annoy me, maybe my reaction to it is over the top. My reaction to it is extreme. Instead of just kind of taking it lightly and saying, you know what, it's not all about me. I can accept that I'm living with people that have weaknesses. I can accept that I'm living with people that are different than I am, that maybe don't have the same opinions that I do, but I still accept them and love. Instead, because of my maybe selfish and narcissistic nature, instead it causes me to become extremely upset and demanding that everyone, whether my spouse or my children, are all just here to please me and do what is it that I want. And I'm even willing to like verbally abuse or otherwise abuse the people around me who do not give me what I want. So we need boundaries with the self. Some examples: controlling anger before speaking in conflict. This is a personal achievement, right? This is something that I as an individual have to learn how to do. I'm angry and yet I stay quiet. I'm angry and whatever comes out of my mouth is still edifying and it is not damaging or hurtful to the people around me. Managing your own emotional health instead of expecting your spouse to fix your moods. This is another thing that sometimes we fall into, where we expect that our spouse is going to be the one to make us feel better. Actually, I have to learn how to manage my own emotions. My spouse can be there as emotional support, as a helper, as someone who can help me to like be objective in the way that I'm seeing certain problems in my life and help me feel that I'm loved and to serve me. But in the end, I am the one responsible for my emotions and no one else is responsible for them. And I cannot blame other people around me for agitating me and causing me to lose my temper. Anyone who loses their temper, it's their own fault. You know, we've all probably at some point blamed others for making us lose our temper. We've blamed others for us to yell at them. And we say, you're the one who makes me like this. You're the one who makes me yell. You're the one who does this to me. Actually, this is completely false, right? Who is in control of me? It's only me. Yeah, there could be factors and things around me that kind of get on my nerves or agitate me. But in the end, I am the one that has to control how I react or not react to these things. And I can do so either in a wise way or I can do so in a very unwise way, in a way that can be damaging. Right? All of these are related to my personal victories, my personal self-control. Avoiding addictive behaviors, like me being able to avoid excessive, addiction to screen time, to food, to alcohol, to spending money, right? All of these things, if I'm not able to control them in myself, then when I get married, it's going to cause a problem now in the relationship. So the more boundaries I have with my own life, in my own life, the more self-discipline that I have in my own life, 100% will affect my marriage in a positive way. And so this is the first boundary. The second is boundaries with your spouse. The purpose is to respect individuality, right? So boundaries, they don't divide, but they define. They define, again, what is mine and what is yours. Even though we are married, but there are certain things that are understood to be mine, and there are certain things that are understood to be yours. It doesn't mean that I cannot share what is mine. It doesn't mean that I am not willing and wanting to give of what is mine. But there is a difference between what is mine and what is yours. And I want you to respect what is mine, just like I want to respect what is yours. For instance, time, right? How do we respect each other's time? If we agree, for instance, that we are going to do something at a certain time, and this can happen when one of the spouses is extremely punctual person and the other one is non-punctual, okay? When the very punctual person who is always on time for everything, they says, okay, at this time we are going to do X, okay? And then they expect that other people in the house are going to honor and respect that agreed upon time, and so at that time they are ready to go. They're ready to do whatever it is. When the spouse or the kids or other people that are there in the household do not honor that time, what does it do? Is it causes that person to become frustrated, and it makes them feel like they are disrespected, because you know that we agreed on this, and this is a boundary that we set. We actually agreed to it. Why is it that you are not on time? And something when this is repeated over and over and over, it can be very difficult, especially for people who are by in their nature kind of very punctual people. So this is an example of a boundary. So yes, we are united, but it doesn't mean that we are identical. Doesn't mean that everything of ours is the same. And so we have to learn how to respect the boundaries of the other. I am aware that my spouse has certain desires. Maybe those desires are not my desires. Like if you've ever read the book of the Five Love Languages, the Five Love Languages talks about that each person has kind of a primary way that they can experience love from others. So for instance, one is quality time. I feel loved when you spend time with me. Another one is gifts. I feel loved when you give me gifts. Another is acts of service. I feel love when you serve me, right? There's different things. The reason that the love languages is important is because different spouses have different love languages. And when we by default assume that other people, that my spouse has the same love language I have. So I think whatever it is that makes me happy is going to make my spouse happy. And it's difficult for us to accept that that's not necessarily the case. It's difficult for me to accept that my spouse has maybe a completely different idea of what is important to him or her than I do. And so part of respecting the boundaries of my spouse is to respect the differences between us. I respect that there is a certain way that you need me to behave in order for you to feel loved by me, that maybe is very different than what I believe, maybe different than what I would expect from you. In Ephesians 5:33, it says, "Let each one of you in particular so love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband." And this is very much based on what each spouse says is love and respect for them, right? This goes back to the idea of communication. If you want to know how to love your wife or how to respect your husband, ask them, what do you want me to do? How do you want me to live? What do you want me to say? How do you want me to treat you, right? And then you will know. And once you know, then now it's up to you to follow that. If you follow it because you believe that it's important, then your spouse will feel honored and appreciated. But if you transgress it, if you don't follow it, then of course your spouse will feel rejected. But the first step is to acknowledge that there are boundaries, to acknowledge that there are differences, and then to honor the differences that we have. Some examples. Giving space for personal prayer, rest, or friendship. So maybe there are responsibilities in the house, but my spouse wants to go pray. Let them go pray. Like, prayer is important, right? This is a boundary, right? Let's say that they are exhausted and tired after a long day and they want to go take a nap. Let them go take a nap. Yeah, maybe that's going to put more burden on you to take care of the kids. Maybe that's going to put more burden on you to take care of some responsibility in the house. But a way for you to show love to your spouse is to respect this boundary. They need something for themselves, right? This is a boundary that they are placing. Respect the boundary. Of course, everything needs to be done with discernment and balance, but the principle is true. Let's say my spouse needs to, wants time to go out with their friends, right? Okay, then this is again a boundary. Let them go do it. Now, there is such a thing as an excess, right? There's such a thing, a person who maybe wants to go out with their friends every single day. Maybe this is too much, right? So everything has to be done with balance and discernment. But this is an example of a boundary, something that they need to do for themselves, for their own health, for their own well-being, for whatever the case might be. It's a boundary that I place, and it's something that the other spouse is called to respect. not demanding to know every thought or message, mutual transparency, and not control. So sometimes spouses can become overly protective, overly controlling, and they do not trust their spouse. And they want to know everything about their life to such a minute level of detail that it becomes overbearing and difficult. Now, definitely there are times, especially when there has been a history of infidelity, for instance, where the idea of being 100% transparent is necessary, right? Because you have kind of lost the trust of the spouse of your spouse because of your previous behavior, and that made you lose any kind of privacy that now you have because now your spouse doesn't trust you. It's understandable, okay? But when there is no concrete reason for us not to trust one another, there should be trust. I don't have to know everything that's happening in your life. Not because, and it's not because you're trying to hide it from me, but I should trust you in the way you spend your time. I should trust you in the people you are talking to. I should trust you in the way that you are living your life, right? If I don't trust you, then that's maybe a deeper problem. Now, again, maybe I don't trust you because there is a problem. Maybe the reason I don't trust you is because I sense that there's something off, okay? But in a healthy relationship, when both people are kind of doing what they should be doing, then there should be trust, there should be transparency. I'm not hiding anything from you. Like if you happen to see my phone, I'm fine with it, right? But at the same time, you shouldn't be coming and every day purposely scanning my phone so that you can find out who I'm texting and who I'm talking to, right? That's a lack of trust, okay? So that's also a boundary, right? The phone, again, is considered quote unquote mine, right? It doesn't mean that you can't have it, doesn't mean you can't use it, doesn't mean you can't have access to it, but it's mine, right? There's no reason for you need to investigate it because, again, that could be reflecting a lack of trust. Expressing feelings honestly without attacking. Like this is, like I said, a boundary. If I want my spouse to change their behavior in some area, then I have to communicate it to them, right? I have to communicate it, but with kindness. I have to communicate it in a way that is not attacking, but in a way that is honest and a way that is clear so that my spouse understands, okay, this behavior that I'm doing is bothering him or bothering her. How can I change, right, my behavior? This is boundaries. The next point, boundaries with extended family. The purpose of this boundary is to protect the marriage as the primary family unit, okay? Especially true in new families, especially true with young couples, couples that have yet to find that balance between, what is us versus what is not us, right? This is one of the things that people are discovering still in their first year of marriage. You know, how is it like for me to now to share my life with another person and to kind of put into perspective all the other relationships that I have compared to my relationship with this new spouse that I have. If I had very close relationship, let's say with friends, if I had very close relationship with my parents, now what does that relationship look like relative to the relationship with my spouse? In Genesis 2:24, it says, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." So this idea of unity and becoming one flesh means that the privacy and the intimacy and the closeness that exists in marriage is greater than that in any other relationship, right? So the number one priority in terms of a relationship is the relationship of the couple, okay? Everyone else on the outside, yes, they can have positive input into the relationship. It doesn't mean that now I'm going to just ignore everybody. It doesn't mean I'm going to reject everybody. It doesn't mean that I can't listen to guidance, right? Let's say I'm, inexperienced in some area and let's say my in-laws or whatever are offering some guidance or advice about something financial or something about our house or anything at all. A person who is wise can listen to the guidance and listen to the advice without feeling without objecting to it, without feeling threatened. Maybe some men might feel like if anyone tries to give them advice, it's as though you are like saying, it's like, what, you don't think I'm good enough to be able to do this on my own? Almost rejecting the concept of receiving guidance or advice, especially when it comes from parents or in-laws. But that's not what it means. What it means is I'm the one in control. I'm the one who decides how I'm going to run my life, but I can get guidance. There's nothing wrong with that. And maybe I disagree with the guidance. I don't have to follow the guidance. But the idea that there is such a thing as something outside. It's a boundary. It's a boundary that I place. Not allowing parents to interfere in marital decisions. This is why you should never discuss your marital problems with your parents. Okay? Because even though it is possible for parents to have good advice, some parents, maybe the minority of parents, can have some good advice when it comes to marital problems that you might be having. What it's going to do is bring somebody who is biased, like necessarily biased because they are the parents of one of the spouses, into the conflict, and they maybe have the best of intentions to try to correct or to help, but more often than not they actually bring more problems. The other thing is, let's say there is some big conflict between the two spouses. Eventually, let's say it gets resolved and they forgive each other and they continue on. But the parents, harder for them to forgive. They will always hold a grudge against what it is that they saw and what is it that they heard. It's better for them not to have any at all knowledge of any problems that are happening in the relationship. Okay? Another boundary, visiting and honoring parents, but making major choices together as husband and wife. So we can visit the parents. We can honor the parents. But at the same time, we're not letting the parents dictate our time. Right? There are some parents that would love it if their kids visited them once or twice a week, calling them every day. If you can afford this, if you are fine with this, if this feels balanced and good to you, there's nothing wrong with it. All right? But if you feel it's too much, if you feel like I don't have the time for this, or you feel it's overbearing, right? You can still honor the parents, but as making a decision together as a couple, if you come to this decision, it's like, well, we can't afford that amount of time with them, then we make that choice ourselves. And we explain that choice and we tell the choice, right? Again, we are making a boundary with the larger family, right? But we do so again with kindness. And as I said, discussing disagreements privately and not in front of others, right? Let all of your arguments be in private. This includes don't argue in front of your children, don't argue in front of your friends, don't argue in front of anyone. Because what will happen is it will send the wrong message about the status of your relationship to the people, right? And it will not be beneficial, and those people will not forget this conversation. Like if you're going to argue in front of your father confession, okay? Don't argue in front of anyone else. Number 4 is boundaries with friends. The purpose is to preserve loyalty and time for the marriage, right? So again, you might have one of the spouses very, very extroverted, outgoing social person, has dozens and dozens or hundreds of friends. Before they got married, they're used to going out with their friends literally every single day. They would stay out late, they would come home late, they are constantly texting them, calling them, getting them involved in all the details of their life. This is who they are, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the moment they get married, now they are still used to this lifestyle. They're used to the idea that I go out every day. They're used to the idea that my friends are such a central part of my life all the time. And if the wife is also that way and she likes, if the husband or the wife, if they both like those same group of people and they still go out and want to go out with them, great. Like that's an example of harmony because you both like the same things. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with being social. But if you're married to a person who either is not a huge fan of your friends or at least not as big a fan as you are, doesn't want to go out every day, feels like your friends are taking you away from the family, right? Then now it starts to become a problem. And you need boundaries there. And again, the priority is on the marital relationship because this is the relationship that you chose to elevate to be the highest and most important priority, the most important relationship in your life. So you need to find a balance. You say, okay, I will still make time for my friends, but that's going to be a minority of the time. This is even more important once you have kids, right? Because now my responsibilities at home have increased, right? The amount of time that I have for my friends has gotten even less. One of the things I really advise people who are looking to get married is find someone who has the same social habits that you do. Because otherwise, it's going to become a problem, okay? Some other examples of boundaries with friends. Not venting about your spouse to friends. Same thing we were saying about to the extended family. Don't speak about your marital problem to your friends. And you might be used to sharing everything with your friends. Now there's all kinds of stuff you should not be sharing with your friends. Anything about your spouse you should not be sharing with your friends. avoid excessive time apart that leads to emotional distance. So again, um, sometimes what will happen is when there starts to develop some kind of an emotional distance in a relationship, in a marriage, then those people who have a lot of friends will divert more and more of their time and energy to their friends to compensate for the emotional distance that's starting to develop in their marriage. And what that does is it accelerates the emotional distance. It makes it so that there's even more emotional distance because now you are using your friends as a means of escape from the house. Whenever there is some problem in the house, whenever there's a problem with stress in the house, whenever there's some conflict in the house, whenever I feel like my spouse and I are not kind of on the same page or we have conflicts a lot, and I begin to escape this by using my friends and other relationships outside of the house to kind of help me moderate my emotions and escape the situation, this is just going to accelerate the problem. So when I need to still maintain those boundaries with friends and say, okay, maybe we need to address the problem, but the solution is not to escape the house. Prioritizing family time over social outings. FOMO is a real thing. And what happens if there is some, I've already decided with my spouse that we're going to have a date night or we're going to do something together, and there's some commitment that's already made in the family, and then I find out, my friends are going out to a sporting event, my friends are going out to dinner, my friends are doing this and that, and they invited me to come, and then I asked my spouse, and they're like, oh, do you want to go to this? And they're like, nope, don't want to go. Then what? Okay, now again, you're having to make a hard decision. What are you prioritizing? Are you prioritizing the commitment you already made with your spouse? Or are you saying, you know what, we can just postpone this, reschedule it to another time, do something else? Well, how do you think your spouse is going to feel if you do that, right? When you come back home, you're going to hear it. So that's not a good example with setting boundaries with friends. Another very important one is boundaries with the opposite sex. Some people believe that after you get married, you will never feel attracted to any other person of the opposite sex again. This is not true. This is not true, right? The purpose of boundaries with the opposite sex is to guard the sacredness of marital intimacy and to avoid temptation. And in Proverbs 6:27 it says, "Can a man take fire to his bosom and his clothes not be burned?" How does this happen? It happens usually very innocently. It happens a lot of times at work, whenever you're interacting with people from the opposite sex at work. And then over time, without realizing it, you begin to enjoy the company of a specific person, not with any bad intentions, right? And you find that you have things in common, you enjoy conversation together, you find yourselves enjoying the company of that person, maybe more and more. At the same time, maybe there are some conflicts at home. Maybe you start to feel like there's more stress at home. The death knell of this is when people start to talk to people of the opposite sex outside their marriage about their marital problems. Once that happens, then it's almost inevitable that this is going to lead to some kind of emotional affair or physical affair, right? Never talk to people outside of your marriage about your marriage, especially people of the opposite sex, no matter who they are, right? The being married does not protect you from being attracted to people of the opposite sex. And again, some people think, oh, well, this is never going to happen to me. This happens to those, unfaithful people that you see in the movies that, have a very bad life and they don't believe in God and they don't believe in, in the sanctity of marriage. No, it happens to everyone, right? Think about King David. King David was a prophet. King David was chosen by God to be king and anointed. King David had miracles happen in his life. King David was a man whom God said, this is a man after my own heart. And King David had an affair and killed the husband of the woman he had an affair with, right? So the idea that there could be a human being that is exempt from this doesn't exist. Anyone can fall into this, right? Avoid private texting or emotional sharing with someone of the opposite sex. Just make it a rule. It doesn't matter whether you like the person or not. It doesn't matter whether you respect the person or not. It doesn't matter whether you see the person. It's not your choice. Like if you work with them, for instance, you're seeing them every day. Put a line and say there are certain things that you are just not going to talk about with them. Talk about work. Talk about anything else. There is no such thing as being friends with people of opposite sex. And I tell this to young people all the time who have a very confused sense of what friendship is, right? Who find themselves like talking to people of the opposite sex on a daily basis and sharing all kinds of stuff with them. And then in the end, they say, oh, we're just friends. Do you even know what a friend is? Like you're getting yourself involved in something that you will be emotionally enmeshed and entangled with the person that you are not going to be able to separate yourself from. And this is even true of married people, okay? Setting clear limits on physical affection or private meetings. Like, don't go out to eat, for instance, with a person of the opposite sex one-on-one. Don't be in a place with them one-on-one, right? Set a rule for yourself. Being open with your spouse about friendships. So the more transparent you are with your spouse about things that are happening in your life, the work that you are doing, the people that you are meeting, and all these things, the more likely that it will be okay. If you start to find yourself that there are certain things you don't want your spouse to know about, you don't want your spouse to know that you've been texting a certain person, you don't want your spouse to know who you're actually meeting, you don't want your spouse to know how much you're talking to a certain person, whatever, just if the thought even enters into your mind, then be careful, because now the reason you are thinking that, you're thinking that your spouse might start to become upset because of the amount of time that you interact with certain other people, then at that point, right, then you have to ask yourself, maybe there really is something that's unhealthy that's happening that I need to stop, okay? It's much easier to stop it before it starts. It's much easier to stop it at the first realization, right? Again, the idea that you will be attracted to people of opposite sex is a given. This is not something that is a question mark. It will happen, okay? But once it happens, and before it happens, you have to be very clear with what are your boundaries that you are not going to cross. Otherwise, you will find yourself caught in something that you will not be able to escape. Especially because again, the devil, he plans all of these attacks in a very clever way. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's going to attack you from one side, and then he's going to attack you from the other side. He's going to attack you from the side of making you feel very kind of emotionally connected to a person outside of your marriage. And at the same time, he's going to attack your marriage and get you and your spouse to be kind of in conflict with one another at the exact same moment. So then you will feel gravitating toward wanting to talk to this other person and wanting to share your emotions with them, right? It all is coordinated. Everything the devil does in his attacks are coordinated. There's nothing random about any of these things happening. They are very coordinated attacks. Protect yourself and place boundaries with the opposite sex. Boundaries with sin. The purpose is to keep God at the center of marriage and avoid moral decay. You want your marriage to be holy. You don't want your marriage simply to be a physical relationship. You don't want your marriage just to be a secular marriage, right? God is the one who created marriage, and it is only through God can a healthy Christian marriage thrive and exist. So for us to have spiritual marriages, for us to have healthy marriages, for us to be able to live in harmony for the rest of our lives together, God has to be in the center. And the only way for God to be in the center is for us to keep sin outside of the marriage. Thessalonians 5:22 says, abstain from every form of evil. So it's not just about, what my spouse and I agree on, right, that we should do. The question we should ask is this honoring God or not? Are our actions as a couple, as a family, honoring God or not, right? This is true as individuals and it's true as a couple. Examples: refusing to lie for your spouse or cover up wrongdoing. What will happen if my spouse comes to me and says, hey, such and such thing, I did something that I shouldn't have done. Please, cover for me and don't tell people that this happened. Okay, well, I'm not going to go and purposely tell people your lie or what you did. But if I'm put in a situation where now I have to lie for the sake of my spouse, then maybe there's a problem, right? I'm crossing the boundary where I'm participating in the sin of my spouse in order to protect my spouse. Okay, I know this is a difficult and delicate situation, but we also have to acknowledge that as a couple, we should be living according to God's commandments. Rejecting sinful entertainment or gossip that corrupts the home atmosphere, right? We are the ones in control of what we see. We are the ones in control of what we allow ourselves to participate in, where we go, what we listen to. All of this should be something that is honoring God, because we want to keep the devil away. We want to prevent him from being able to attack us and to use whatever avenues at his disposal to come and to undermine our relationships. Supporting one another in repentance and confession, right? How often are we encouraging our spouses to go and confess their sins? How often are we encouraging our spouses to pray? How often are we encouraging our spouses to read the Bible, to do any kind of spiritual activity? This is actually one of the primary roles that we have, and this is why we say that marriage is a path of salvation. That I am now with another person who is leading me and helping me to walk the path of salvation, and definitely should not be a hindrance to me, right? But in reality, a lot of times it's the opposite. A lot of times a spouse might kind of hinder their spouse from doing these things rather than encouraging them to do it. So this is, again, boundaries with sin. We are placing boundaries to protect each of us as individuals and the marriage as a whole. Okay, how can we establish boundaries? One is we pray together. Why? Because we want our boundaries to be aligned with God. We want God to give us wisdom and discernment to know how we can set proper boundaries. And again, the three kinds of boundaries we talked about. There's the boundaries with the self, so that each of us can become godly and righteous. There is the boundaries in the relationship, how we can communicate effectively with one another and how we can interact with one another in a healthy way. And then there is the boundaries with the things outside the relationship. How can we establish good and healthy boundaries? We need to pray and ask God to help us establish those boundaries. We go to him, we say, God, I feel like I don't have healthy boundaries. I don't know what boundaries to set. Help me to set good boundaries. 2, we communicate clearly our boundaries with each other, right? And with those who are outside. So when we are speaking about, let's say, with our in-laws, and we want to set boundaries with our in-laws, we communicate clearly those boundaries with our in-laws. When we're having boundaries in the relationship, we communicate them clearly and lovingly with one another. 3, we agree on standards that we want to live by together. That could be all kinds of things, all the decisions that we make together. How much screen time are we going to have in our home for us, for the kids? How often we're going to visit our family? How often and how much are we going to use social media? Everything that we want to be together in unity to protect ourselves from harmful influences, right? Establishing boundaries, we communicate and we help to establish those things together. 4, we have to be consistent, and this is very important, and also why we should be very careful how we set boundaries, because sometimes we set boundaries that are unrealistic. You know, like a person who's watching TikTok for 10 hours a day, and then they say, okay, I'm going to stop watching TikTok altogether. That's a nice goal, but maybe unrealistic. Maybe you need to first cut it down to, 6 hours, and then maybe you can cut it down to 3 hours, then maybe you can cut it down to an hour, and then maybe you can stop. Right? But we have to be realistic in what we can attain. Maybe some people can do it, but not everybody can do it, right? Some people who are like become very zealous about their spiritual life say, I want to pray 7 hours of the Agbeya every day. It's like, well, have you ever done that before? No. It's like, well, maybe that's too much too quickly. Maybe you need to start slow and you need to build it up, right? Being consistent is thinking about the long term, right? It's not about working as fast as possible, but it's about being as focused as possible, focusing on what can be attained, and then not losing the progress that we've made. So I always tell people, like whenever there's marriage counseling, I ask people, what one thing can your spouse do to improve the situation, to improve the conflict that you're having? Just focus on one thing. All you need is one thing. Once you start to see that your spouse is starting to improve in one thing, it gives you hope. Makes you feel like there's hope, there's progress, there's change, and that my spouse is putting in an effort in order to try to improve the relationship. Just focus on one thing at a time. And then once you've kind of mastered that, once you've improved in that area, then move on to the next thing, right? But be consistent. Don't give yourself, too much too quickly so that you can't maintain it. Also, revisit periodically. Once you set a plan of how you want to establish healthy boundaries for yourself or your relationship and with others, it doesn't mean that your first draft of that, is going to be the right one. It doesn't mean that things aren't going to change over time that causes you to have to reevaluate what healthy boundaries you need to have, right? With boundaries, we tend to overcorrect, and then we have to readjust. A person who's been struggling with no boundaries maybe needs to overcorrect. They need to kind of make an extreme decision, and then once they realize, okay, now I need to adjust it a little bit and make it more and more practical. Revisit the boundaries that you've set. What to do when boundaries are violated, because it's definitely a big part of setting boundaries. And one of the reasons actually people don't want to set boundaries because they're afraid of the confrontation that will happen once people violate their boundaries. Right? If I tell someone, this is how I want you to behave, and I communicate it to you, the moment that they now transgress my boundary, they cross my boundary, now I have a decision to make. It's like, well, do I just ignore it? Do I pretend like it didn't happen? Do I just, try to imagine that everything is fine and that I'm not upset? Or what does it mean? No, right? The moment you set a boundary also means you need to defend that boundary. You need to defend the boundary. You need to enforce the boundary. Enforcing the boundary doesn't mean that it has to be with aggressive confrontation. It doesn't have to be aggressive. It doesn't have to be with anger. It doesn't have to be with us trying to blame and shame other people for not doing what we ask them to do. We can address it calmly, but we should address it. Matthew 18 says, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. Right? If someone transgresses, if someone hurts me in some way, if I care about the relationship, then I have to communicate. Right? If I don't care about the relationship and you don't care if that relationship dies, you don't care if you're going to have resentment for that person and you're just going to naturally drift away from that person, don't communicate. But if you care about that relationship to thrive, then you have to communicate, because whatever it is that happened is going to keep happening. If someone is crossing a boundary, maybe they don't realize they're crossing it. Maybe they don't realize the effect that it's having on me. Maybe they don't realize that I'm in pain because of what they've done. You can't continue to be in a close relationship with someone who's constantly hurting you and then pretend like everything is fine. So your two options are either you're going to break off the relationship or otherwise be far more distant with them, or you're going to address it. And when you address it, you should address it calmly and with love. Explain why it matters. Explain why you set this boundary to begin with. I didn't set this boundary just because some arbitrary rule that I set for myself. Let me explain to you why this boundary is important to me, why it's something that I really care about. And rebuild the trust slowly. Give people grace. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to fail. They're not going to always follow the boundary. Revisit this and keep doing this. Seek counseling as well. People can maybe you don't know what is the best way to address when a person crosses your boundary. Ask someone you trust. Maybe they can give you some good ideas or to help you to see the situation with some more clarity. What happens to a marriage without boundaries? In Proverbs 25, it says, whoever has no rule over his own spirit is like a city broken down without walls. And going back to the example that I gave at the beginning about the garden, this is another example. Imagine that you have a city, and that city, they're surrounded by enemies, and there's no walls of that city. So all of the enemies are just going to come and rampage and come through the city and destroy it. The boundaries are there to protect what is inside, right? To protect which is most sacred. What happens to a marriage without boundaries? Emotional exhaustion and resentment. I'm going to begin resenting you because you're constantly doing what I don't want you to do, and I don't know how to communicate well what I don't want you to do. I don't know how to communicate to you in a way that for you to understand, right, how I want you to behave in certain areas. And so I resent you. I'm emotionally exhausted. I'm distressed. It weakens the marriage. Loss of respect and trust, right? Again, I feel like I'm upset with you because you're not following the boundary that I've set for you, right? And so that's affecting the relationship. Entanglement with sin or inappropriate relationships. If I am not setting a boundary with sinful things, if I am allowing myself to be exposed to things that are going to harm me spiritually, then I'm becoming entangled and addicted to various kinds of sins. And going back to inappropriate relationships that can lead to infidelity, I'm not placing a boundary there, and it can damage the marriage. The breakdown of communication and safety. If I don't have clear boundaries, then we don't communicate well together. If I don't put boundaries with myself that says I'm going to speak always with kindness, I'm always going to speak with patience, right? Then I might find myself losing my temper, yelling, being aggressive or violent in various ways, or being manipulative. Also safety, as I said, we operate best when we know where the boundaries are. I know where to go and where not to go, right? If I'm walking blind and I don't know, it's like walking on landmines, you know? And some married couples feel this way. They feel like they're walking on landmines. When am I going to hit one? When am I going to hit one and there's going to be an explosion? I don't know where it is. I don't have a good sense of when it is or where it is, so I'm always nervous. I'm always stressed. Set boundaries lovingly. Boundaries are not rejection. They are an act of love and protecting the relationship. Even though it seems like when you think about boundaries, like they involve things that are kind of against unity, we think about unity as being oneness, that we are in agreement about everything, right? That we are on the same page about everything. Boundaries protect the relationship because they define what is the differences between us, and it's okay for there to be differences. There will be differences. I will never know what's in your head. You will never know what's in my head until we define it, we communicate it, right? We express it. They are not a rejection. They are a description of what is the path we need to navigate in order for our relationship to be successful. Example, saying I need space to calm down. Like let's say we have a conflict, but I'm not in a place right now where I'm able to communicate it. I'm not able to communicate because I'm upset. So to say I need space to calm down is a boundary. To say I cannot talk right now. I need to wait a little bit before we can talk. And the other spouse should honor this boundary that was set. Now, there definitely needs to be, a limit to that time for having space to calm down. It can't extend days, right? But maybe immediately discussing it is not the right thing. Refusing sin but still showing kindness. Correcting gently rather than condemning. These are all, the idea of being loving and being, intentional of setting boundaries in a way that I make sure is not going to hurt my spouse. So conclusion. Boundaries are a gift from God to protect love and not restrict it. We need to have boundaries in our relationships. Relationships without boundaries are going to run into all kinds of problems. A marriage with healthy boundaries becomes safe, joyful, and a holy place where both can flourish. And Christ is the ultimate boundary keeper. And actually, he said, what? Let your yes be yes and your no, no. He made it very clear. We should not be trying to manipulate each other. We should not be lying to one another. We should not be silent about what we believe, especially in marriage, which is the most intimate of relationships. Instead, we need to be honest, but loving and gentle, but clear in how we communicate our boundaries with one another. Glory be to God forever. Amen. Are there any questions? How do you know if a boundary is a good one or bad? I.e., I want to watch X hours of TV a day. What if the spouses disagree on the time? What's appropriate and what's not? When it comes to like a personal rule, right, that you are trying to follow, this is an example of, it could be two things. One, it's the example of watching TV. It's a personal boundary in the sense that it's going to have an impact on your own personal life. The amount of time that you spend, let's say, wasting it doing something kind of mindless as a kind of entertainment. How much time is appropriate? This is, of course, a personal, effect on your own spiritual life, but it's also an effect on the relationship because the amount of time that a person spends doing something kind of on their own, regardless of what that thing is, whether it's TV or going out with your friends or pursuing your own hobbies or anything, is time away from your spouse and time away from the family. So there's two aspects to this. The first aspect, which is the personal side, this is definitely something that you should speak to your father of confession about because he can set for you some guidance on what makes sense in your specific situation. Like I said, there are some people, they casually watch an hour or 2 hours of something entertaining per day and whether they're single or they're married, and it's not causing any problem. But there are other people that have some kind of media addiction, and they're watching literally 10 hours a day. And so how is it that they can overcome this? And this is having all kinds of effects on their life other than just their marriage relationship. It's having effect on their personal spiritual life as well. So when it comes to that aspect of it, the I think getting guidance from your father confession, it can help you in your specific situation, right? Improve. That's why I don't want to give a number, right? Because everybody's different and everybody has a different situation, right? Um, when it comes down to the second part, right, then the answer there is, well, how does your spouse feel? Like, what are the responsibilities and what are the things? Like, it's finding balance. So, if I am in my daily life, I'm able to be, I'm able to honor my work time and be diligent in my work. I'm able to spend time with my family, spend time with my spouse, take care of all of the responsibilities at home, and after all of that, I have enough time to watch TV for an hour or 2 hours or whatever, and my spouse is okay with it, then that's great. Like, again, there's no magical number. But if my spouse feels that my desire to watch something entertaining is preventing me from spending adequate time with them or with the kids or to take care of the responsibilities in the home, and it's causing a problem, then now maybe even what would be considered fine if I were a single person, then now that also is becoming a problem. So there isn't one magical right answer to this question, but it depends very much on communicating with your spouse, coming to an agreement of what is reasonable, and then also your father of confession to see if however long you're wanting to watch TV is maybe harmful for you. What is a good way to set boundaries with a spouse without feeling guilty or sound offenses? For example, working out. So when we speak about that there are certain activities that we as individuals need to do for ourselves, especially when those activities are beneficial. Like those, like something like working out, for instance, is beneficial for your health and it gives you more energy. It improves kind of your focus and attention and actually makes your life better. So when there is something positive that my spouse wants to do that's going to enrich their life and make their life better, then I should try to find a way to make it happen. Now, maybe in some extreme situations, if there just literally is not any time and it's very difficult, like I can understand that such a situation can exist. But at the same time, in many situations, if I have to kind of make more sacrifices in order to allow my spouse to have time to do that, which is important for them to do something on their own, then I think it's something very, very important to be done. And you want to explain this to your spouse. You can tell them, I want to have a certain amount of time that I work out in the week. It's very important for my health. I think it makes me have more energy even for the family and for other things in my work. And so I want to, work out a certain amount of time. And maybe the negotiation, like if your spouse feels that it's going to be too much, the negotiation can be on how much time that is, how many hours in the week that it is, right? And that's really the discussion and the negotiation based on the responsibilities and the requirements of the household. But the idea of spending time to work out as an individual is very good. I think there shouldn't be any problem with that.